being
100%.
driven.
Jumptown V2, another one of the specific design objectives was to use it as the first test case for these systemic triggers to where we can actually have quantum inject this information dynamically. Yes. And so like right now we're running Ninetales, and one of the complaints that I've seen is, hey, it doesn't fire often enough. It's like I missed it and then it's gone. And so one of the directions in which we want to go is having some of these events like Jumptown, which can be triggered by player actions or Quanta, or player and Quanta basically doing whatever we determine. Maybe it is a certain amount of drugs are being bought, sold, lots of drug runners are basically traversing this shipping lane. Whatever kind of conditions we want to put, and then we can measure both on the quantum side, eventually, and then even in the short term, on the players, is like how many players are basically moving drugs back and forth here? Yeah. How many players are basically dropping commodities off at this location? And if we have a dynamic event compatible with whatever these whatever these conditions are, then we can go ahead and automatically trigger it and inject those customized parameters into it so that it basically more accurately represents what's actually going on in that area.
Right now we're just shortchanging that, but eventually, yeah.
That's actually, I like the whole Jumptown concept, but my favorite aspect by far is the fact that it's being designed as a test case for some of this up and coming systemic technology on the back end, so that we can start to go, at 3 a.m. conditions were met, and we're going to go ahead and trigger Jumptown on Lyria, and we're basically going to put this particular drug into it, and it's going to be 679 units of drugs, and however quickly players are there to basically we those things out, that will be how long it lasts. And so all of a sudden you have it's a transient event, which is sometimes we may inject, if we can scale this however we want, such that when these conditions are met, do we take the total number of delivered drugs or whatever and multiply times 10? So we can basically turn it into something that's going to range for an hour, or a day, or 10 days, or whatever else. But we can add that variable factor to where it's not always a constant. It's not always on for the entire for the entire lifetime of the release. It's not always 7 days. There's actually going to be it's going to depend upon what is really happening within the world, and that's going to cause it to be customized.
It's just something that's happening in the game. I mean, it's natural events triggering in the world.
You mentioned people saying like Ninetales wasn't happening enough, and they would log on and they would wait for it to happen. That is not the goal. The goal is I log on and I see something is happening. There should always be an event of some kind that you could go and do. Maybe you log on and you want to do this particular thing, but also, oh man, that's happening right now? Cool. Kind of thing. So
yeah, there will be some of both. Xenothreat is obviously the big ones, and then you've got what I'd call like the mid-range things like the Ninetales and stuff, where you're locking down an entire area, and all of a sudden we've cordoned off a region, and we're not allowing you to easily transport cargo back and forth to there, which basically starts knocking the prices up, which is why we added all the the price alerts and things like that, so that you can actually be enticed by the fact that this area that's been choked off, they really, really need copper, and they're willing to pay this. Don't you want to try to break through the blockade? That actually does kind of get to what you were saying earlier in terms of allowing some of the player ships that are going to, or some of the NPCs that are going to interdict you to actually be more effective at it as we start to expand those quantum interdiction zones to a larger size.
It all interconnects.
Yeah, and it could be influenced by players or the back-end simulation. It's something that we'll be able to balance. We'll be able to pull analytics from the back-end. It's measurable, and it'll be something we can tune over time.
Another one on another point worth talking about on Jumptown for future directions forward is, and you and I have had this conversation a couple of times, is I would like to eventually be able to have NPCs basically fill in the other side. Like now, one of the inherent flaws in it is it's purely PvP, right? Which is I go there, I basically control that area, I get the loot for as long as it's pumping it out, and unless other players come and try to basically kick you out of that area, it's a cakewalk. And what we would want to be able to simulate, obviously, is if players are not going there, would Quanta, over on the simulation side, would they be attracted to, this value generator? Of course they would. Great. At what rate? And what rate's going to depend upon what it's spitting out, what the street, value of that stuff is, how far it is from civilization, and they therefore have to travel, et cetera. And so the point would be that we want to be able to, just as we were talking about earlier, we want to, with Ninetales, to where we were aligning, players on either side, saying we'll use NPCs to basically, to balance it however we want. In this case, if there are 0 players on on the attacking side trying to take it over, well, we're going to have to fill those ranks with NPCs.
That being said, one of the things that is called out very often as being an exciting portion of Jumptown, the original, was going there and not knowing if you were going to find resistance. That can kind of keep you on the edge of your seat a little bit. There's that, it's too quiet. So it won't always be
100%, but you don't need that uncertainty doesn't necessarily need to only come as a result of whether or not players are willing to do it. We can have uncertainty on the NPC side and say, maybe we will, maybe we won't, basically, have them assault. Maybe they'll come in a straggler, one guy at a time. Maybe they'll come in a big coordinated group of 12 NPCs, all in heavy armor, armed to the tooth, and and you'll basically be doing your absolute best, to hold that, calling your friends, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, right now, unless we have the ability to basically set those scenarios up, then some players on some servers will never get that cool experience of a whole burst of guys arriving at one shot, or the stragglers. Now, if players are basically going in there attacking, well, sure, I've already got 20 players on this side. Maybe I don't need to throw any other NPCs out to.
Or maybe I want to add fuel to the fire, frankly.
Or maybe you want to throw.
Players were very creative in the first one.
And that's honestly what I'm really looking forward to is what is the tools that have been added to the sandbox at this point. It's such a simple event. I really am looking forward to seeing how they handle it. You can come in a land vehicle, and you can set up a tank or a ballista and just pick people out of the sky, defend that area, turn it into a fortress. You can have dogfights in the air over it. You can, if you're stupid and you leave your ship turned off with its shields off, someone's gonna blow that up.
You and I talked in the early stages of Ninetales about the fact that it's a drug lab. Why is it basically spitting these things out? And the idea would be, well, they've produced a lot of them at that location, and so who would be one of the most logical people to come and try to take back control? It would be the guys that that basically originally had control of that drug lab. It'd be whatever criminal organization we want to basically have that thing,
or a competition.
100%. And so you could see players are in there basically reaping the rewards. Another player team assaults them, and now the much larger threat comes, and the players it could be a 3-way. The players can team up, with each other to basically hold them off and then split the goods, et cetera, et cetera. So the real point, to my mind, is it just comes back to is configurability, which is I want to be able to vary the location, vary the the type of material, vary the quantity of that material and the frequency with which it's produced. I want to be able to vary the challenges you'll face trying to basically hold it, and all of a sudden that starts to become representative of what we're trying to do with all these different dynamic events, which is we want to make templates that we can. I always call it object-oriented content creation. It's such a common concept over on the coding side. You don't really see much focus over on the content creation to basically put all of these rules and procedures and processes in place so that you can basically build nice modular chunks of content and easily link them to other pieces, so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time you're doing this. Like a good a good example is the spawn closets that we're doing over for some of the infiltrator missions that we'll be talking about. It's that's absolutely going to play a factor in some of these future iterations of things, whether it's Ninetales. You could see Ninetales eventually supporting on the derelicts. Some of those derelicts actually have Ninetales members on them that we can basically create 2 or 20. We can create them over time. We can basically change the
or taking
what their
over the
loadouts
station. There's so many things you can do with that. So.
Yeah, Pyro is going to be a good test bed for a lot of that stuff, just with the strife that is supposed to be going on out there.
So,
not to give
looking forward to it.
All right, let's bring Luke into the conversation now. We started working on the Xenothreat event around March of 2020, and it took about a year to get it out the door. We knew that it was going to be extremely difficult because we were missing so much of what we needed, including everything from the dynamic mission service that would drive the back-end logic, to the capital ship AI, target prioritization for turrets, functional countermeasures, tons of dialogue, and countless other things. Part of the allure, though, was that in one shot, we'd have a great test case for a litany of important features, like battles far larger than anything we'd previously done, and a testbed for creating missions that supported a variety of different playstyles, like ship-to-ship combat and salvaging. So, Luke, from your perspective, what were some of the big lessons we learned from Xenothreat?
Well, Xenothreat was our first attempt at a large-scale fleet battle, so we learned a lot. The biggest takeaway was that we needed to develop our overly simplistic friendly fire system, which was leading to players receiving unfair crime stats and being kicked from the mission. So in the recent re-release of the event, we made major improvements to our friendly fire detection and tolerances, which drastically cut down on unfair crime stats according to the feedback and analytics we received. What's great is this kind of change improves the whole game, not just the event, and paves the way for more large-scale space battles in the future. I think it's also important to add that another thing that became clear was that players wanted a counter mission involving PvP. So we've started planning with this in mind for subsequent releases.
Luke, as the performance gradually improves over the next few quarters, what sort of things would you most like to change about Xenothreat?
I think most people would expect my answer to be throw more AI at the player, but it might be that when performance improves, our AI becomes much deadlier, which could actually lead to us reducing their numbers. This balancing is always the most difficult part of mission creation. The AI's performance can be wildly different on our local servers versus what it might be like on an overtaxed live server. And if a mission is too easy, it's not just a case of throwing more AI at it, as this will only compound the performance issues. We were happy with the balancing we achieved, but it wasn't quite what we hoped for. Once performance is improved, we hope to rebalance and deliver the experience we intended.
Luke, we've invested a lot of engineering effort into our spawn closet tech, which allows us to precisely and intelligently push NPCs into and out of an area. The first major test of this tech will be the Infiltrator class of missions, which I wanted to provide much more varied and challenging FPS situations than anything we've previously seen. To that end, we can now determine at runtime the type and number of NPCs we want to insert at a location, often at the behest of Quantum. We can also apply a litany of rules to the spawning, like how many can be active at once, how the spawn rate changes when an alarm has gone off, and whether a boss might be found wandering the area with his guards or only after they've all been dispatched. The mission template supports a wide variety of objectives, ranging from killing everyone at that location to only killing select individuals, to protecting NPCs from any harm, to hacking computers, to extracting designated materials. Can you go over some of these mission variations in more detail?
Of course, Tony. The underground facilities were the locations we chose for our first implementation of spawn closets, so this is where players will find new missions, as well as some existing missions that have been vastly improved by the addition of spawn closets and non-combatants. One of the new missions sends players to kill a heavily armoured target who only shows himself once his crew have been wiped out. Another involves the players searching a friendly facility for a number of boxes, identified using information provided on their mobiGlass. At any point during the mission, small enemy assaults can be triggered, and the thing I love about this one is that players can choose to avoid the fight and gamble on the facility's defenders being able to repel them. And the last one I'd like to mention is, thanks to spawn closets, we now have our first FPS defend mission where players join friendly AI in defending a facility from multiple waves of enemies. And the nice thing about this one is that in addition to the basic mission reward, players also receive bonuses for the AI who survive to the end.
Some of the benefits from this mission template are coming from smarter use of existing tech, like more modular subsumption logic, and some of it stems from new features like the spawn closets. Luke, how has the design setup of the Infiltrator scenario varied from what you've done in the past?
Well, spawn closets have had a dramatic effect on the types of missions we can build. Without them, we were unable to spawn AI mid-mission, as we couldn't risk them spawning out of thin air without warning, as that's really unfair on players. Thanks to spawn closets, we can now spawn reinforcement waves and spring ambushes anytime we want, with players able to recognise where AI is likely to reinforce from. Not only does this allow us to build brand new mission types, it allows us to spawn manageable amounts of AI and only reinforce when some of those are dead, to better balance the difficulty of the encounter. And you mentioned we're building our logic in a modular fashion, and the Eliminate Boss mission is a great example of that, because we've essentially taken the Eliminate All and Eliminate specific objectives and combined them to create a new experience where players must draw their target out of hiding by first killing all of his crew.
Luke, another mission template we're currently working on is called Rescue Transport, and it revolves around getting NPCs to a specified location. One of the variations allows the NPC to request personal transport via a service beacon, just like a player, to a designated location. Other variations involve adding assorted complications to getting the NPCs on board your ship, like having to first outsmart or outfight their captors, unlocking their prison door to release them, safely escorting them back to your ship for transport to the desired drop site. Longer term, we're going to add support in this mission template for a lot of other combinations, like having to drag unconscious characters onto your ship and back to a hospital, and trying to lead NPCs through a burning ship. Luke, where do we stand with the current implementation of this, and what remains to be done before we can push it out the door?
Well, Tony, we're at the point where we have a working prototype in which AI can be asked to follow, wait, and take a seat aboard your ship. And even with this rudimentary setup, we've been able to flesh out the mission flow to a very detailed degree, and have made a lot of headway into planning the dialogue requirements. We've gone some effort to make sure that the mission is more than a delivery mission where the box has legs, so the client has patience that can wear thin, with your tip and rating being calculated based on your performance. We'll also be developing AI behaviours to deal with what happens should the player decide to kidnap them. The rescue mission module has been designed in such a way that it can work in conjunction with others like Infiltrator, meaning that we can easily inject some obstacles in your way, like a base full of captors. These missions will drive the development of AI following, so once complete, we'll be able to leverage that throughout the rest of the game.
I want to pivot now and give an update on some of the systemic functionality that I detailed last spring. I said that we were soon going to have quantum controlling a few select bits of the universe, and that we were going to be very measured in the rollout. We remain on track to activate these changes with 3.16 at the end of the year, and this initial release will allow quantum to dictate 3 encounter frequencies, the prices of 3 commodities, and everything related to combat assist service beacons. As the simulation is refined and more of the linkage to the game is completed, we will expand the scope of these early tests and enable quantum to play an ever larger role in shaping the universe. So let's go over how the gameplay experience is set to change. Probability volumes dictate how the likelihood of an encounter type varies within that region, and historically that information has always been static. Dynamic events, introduced in early 2021, allow that data to be changed by mission logic, but still don't support systemic modulation. You can see the frequency curve for pirate activity in red on the screen here, and the long and short of it is that no matter how many pirates you, your friends, or the entire community kill, the likelihood of encountering a pirate at this spot right here would always be about 5% per minute, and farther out, right about there, the odds would drop to 2%. Now, let's see what happens when we activate quantum and it starts to provide real-time guidance to the probability volume service that controls this information and distributes it to the game servers. As is often the case with such demonstrations, the simulation is running at an exaggerated rate of speed so that I can easily illustrate some key points. The first thing you'll notice is that the fixed pirate curve just flatlined because quantum says there aren't currently any pirates in this area. There are some valuable materials on the surface of Selene though, and that's starting to attract some quantum miners represented in green. The distribution of the miners determines the shape of the green curve, and the quantity determines the amplitude. With the value of the ore available on Selene sky high and no threat in sight, the number of miners continues to increase, and you can see the encounter curve changing to reflect that. Pirates are drawn to high concentrations of wealth with minimal security though, and are starting to swarm into the area, and as they do, you can see the red pirate curve adjusting. Quanta security, represented in blue, is drawn to conflict, and is thus often a lagging indicator of criminal activity. So at this point, there are several distinct things happening. The number of miners in the area is still increasing, but the rate of increase has slowed dramatically as they start to weigh the increased risk of piracy. The number of pirates is still increasing because there's still sufficient value in the area to attract them and not yet sufficient security to dissuade them. The number of security forces continues to rise because the pirate problem is raging out of control, and thus security pay in this area has gone through the roof. This trend continues for a while until finally the risk of piracy gets too high and the quantity of miners starts to drop. The pirates are doing their own independent mental calculus and still see sufficient value in the area, even once the miners start to fall off, to continue increasing their numbers, but that simply speeds up the rate of decline in the miners, while at the same time, the threat from security continues to grow. So eventually, the number of pirates in the area begins to fall off as well. As the threat of piracy begins to subside, the impact gradually ripples through the economy, lowering the rate of pay and demand for security services. The quantity of security forces streaming into the area eventually peaks too then and begins to decline. If you watch the curves, you'll see a rhythmic action to it all, with miners looking for high-value ore in safe areas, pirates searching for unprotected wealth, and security chasing conflict. 3 different but very interdependent calculations. The system is always searching for equilibrium, and just as in a real economy sometimes overshoots a bit in one direction or the other, which ultimately equates to opportunity for the thinking player. NBC Combat Assist service beacons have historically been generated via probability volume data, and were thus every bit as static as the encounter frequencies that I just covered. The odds of a request for combat assistance at a given location didn't vary based upon what was happening in that area at that time, and no amount of concerted community effort to stamp out what was putting those NPCs in danger had any chance of succeeding. To illustrate what's changed, let's jump back to Quantum. The miners are back in force, but there aren't yet any pirates, and thus there aren't any requests for combat assistance. Just as previously occurred, though, the pirates are going to slowly sniff out this opportunity and begin gravitating to this location. As their numbers increase, so will the odds of conflict with the miner, and thus the likelihood of a combat assist service beacon being issued. You can see a few contracts now represented by the green icons. Quantum is dictating how many beacons should be present in this area in the exact details, such as how much alpha UEC is being offered, but the data is actually maintained by the service beacon service that interfaces to the game servers and exposes these contracts to players. So, every contract that you're seeing pop up, which is a direct result of the amount of conflict happening within Quantum, can be seen and accepted by someone within the actual game. Security has started to show up, but isn't yet a major force, and the risk of piracy has gotten so great that some of the miners have decided to exit. The frequency of combat assist beacons is a function of both the quantity of miners and pirates, and clamped by the minimum of either. So, as the miners depart, the number of outstanding beacons drops. Security has now reached the point where it's really starting to deter the pirates, and the reduced number of miners is just adding fuel to the fire. So now the number of pirates starts to fall off pretty dramatically, which also impacts the total number of active beacons and instantiation frequency. Player actions are fed back into Quantum, such that if a lot of beacons are accepted and the NPC is successfully defended in the game, the security risk as perceived by the pirates in Quantum will increase, thus affecting their sense of whether the risk justifies the reward. This means that not only will the system ebb and flow of its own accord, but your actions within the game will directly impact the simulation and thus the overall state of the universe. There's one other important thing that I want to mention here, and that's the value of the additional context that Quantum is providing. We now know exactly who issued the request for combat assistance and even the likelihood that multiple ships might be involved. All of this information can be packaged up and associated with the beacon so that when and if a player accepts the contract, the instantiated mission can be customized to better reflect what Quantum says you should be seeing. The shop service has always had the ability to modulate the price of commodities based upon things like the amount of inventory on hand and its rate of change, but we haven't really exploited that feature for some of the basics like fuel and HPMC, which is the material required to effect repairs on a ship. One of the reasons for this is that it's one thing to have tradable commodities fluctuate in value according to some algorithmic logic that doesn't consider anything beyond the confines of that particular shop, but it's quite another when those materials are critical to playing the game. Now that we can properly gauge demand based upon factors external to the shop, though, even if the simulation logic still needs a lot of work, we're going to flip the switch and let the prices of fuel and repair materials start to undulate. So let's bring Quantum up again. The Tram and Myers mining outpost on Cellin has been selected so that we can see its real-time prices for plasma fuel, quantum fuel, and HPMC. Keep an eye on these prices as the Quanta arrive on scene. A few of the miners are from distant locales and will be looking to top off their quantum fuel tanks, and that increased consumption is causing prices to trickle up just a bit. Plasma fuel is jumping quite a bit more, though, because it's in constant demand due to the fact that the miners routinely have to traverse the surface of the moon looking for valuable deposits of ore to extract. The price of HPMC hasn't budged because there hasn't been any conflict in the area, but that's about to change. The pirates have started to arrive and attack the miners, and that means that there are going to be some damaged ships that require repairs, and the price will continue to rise as the amount of conflict grows. Pirates require fuel too, and most of their need revolves around the plasma they'll use to engage ships in close proximity, so it's starting to get fairly expensive. Security forces have now started arriving in force, which means even more conflict in the area, which is why the price of HPMC has finally started to take off. Security forces burn a lot of plasma fuel hunting for pirates, and this is proving to be more demand than the local stores of inventory can satisfy. This means temporary shortages and skyrocketing prices until either the demand abates or the economy rebalances to ensure a more regular supply of fuel to this area. Up until now, all of our dynamic events have been manually triggered by someone loading up Quasar, selecting an event, specifying the input variables, and activating it. This works fine for major events that are intended to run for a long period of time, but it's problematic when the event needs to run multiple times per day or only when specific conditions warrant or needs to be customized based upon the current state of the universe. The solution to this problem is systemic triggers, which are small analytical programs that let us specify what sort of conditions within Quantum warrant the creation of a dynamic event and allow that event's inputs to be mapped to all sorts of simulation state. I'm going to bring Quantum up one last time and highlight the location of the 3 drug labs within the Stanton system. Raven's Roost is on Microtech's moon Calliope, Jumptown is on Crusader's moon Yella, and Paradise Cove is on ArcCorp's moon Lyria. For this test, I've removed all commodities except for drugs, and thus any green quanta you see moving around are focused on moving these illicit narcotics. A systemic trigger has been set up that monitors the total drugs purchased at any of the drug labs, which you can see in the graphs below the star map. If the total amount of drugs purchased at one of these locations over a period of time exceeds the specified threshold, it will trigger the Jumptown V2 dynamic event. The location and quantity of drugs sold would be passed to the event as inputs, which the mission logic might use for any manner of things, such as temporarily overriding the shopping data at that site for the duration of the event. The shop service that communicates with the game servers is linked to Quantum, and thus all player transactions in the game are filtered back into the simulation, and their purchases are therefore just as relevant to the totals as those initiated by Quanta. All of the drug labs are seeing a bit of action, and Paradise Cove looked like it might be the first to breach the threshold. Some red pirates have started moving into that area now, though, and the green freighters have started to flee. It looks like they've decided to focus on Raven's Roost, and you can tell by the constant level of elevated purchases that they're probably going to trip the trigger pretty soon. There, that's it. The conditions for the systemic trigger have been met. You can see that Jumptown V2 has now been added to Quasar's active dynamic events list at the top right, and below that you can see the input parameters that it was sent, which include the Raven's Roost location and a numeric value of 916 for the total purchased drugs variable, which the actual Jumptown V2 logic uses to configure how many free units of drugs the location will produce over the lifetime of the event. The ultimate purpose of systemic triggers, then, is to allow us to easily and programmatically dictate when and exactly how handcrafted custom content will be layered onto the background tapestry driven by quantum systemic logic. As our library of dynamic events grows and the sophistication of the simulation evolves, you'll eventually find that it's difficult to tell where one system ends and another begins, and the whole experience will just feel more engaging and unique than what either technology could deliver by itself. That's it for our show today. I hope that you now have a better sense of some of the things we're aiming to accomplish over the next year, and that you're as excited as we are about the potential of these new features and technologies to really transform the gameplay experience. Until next time.
So that's it. We're done. That's the whole show. Another CitizenCon in the bag. This one's a little different than others, but still our chance to come together safely and celebrate our shared interest and commitment to making Star Citizen everything we all want it to be. So what did we learn this year? You thought I was gonna do it, but I gotta bust those bingo cards, right? If I had to guess what we learned that I'm just the lucky one that gets to sit here in front of the work of dozens of others putting today together, themselves in front of the work of hundreds more who dedicate their efforts day in and day out to making the biggest and bestest damn space game ever. It's my honor and that of the team here to represent their work every week, every month, and every year. For CitizenCon 2951, I'm Jared Huckabee. Until next year, have fun, be safe, tell those you love that you love them. I love you, John. And now here's Chris Roberts to take us home.
Well, I hope all of you enjoyed everything you saw today. We're very proud of what we've achieved so far, what we're working on, what we're doing in the future, and it was great to be able to get in depth and show and discuss a lot of that today with you guys. And I just wanted to tell each and every one of you how much we appreciate all of you, your support, dedication, the hours you put into playing the game, giving us feedback, putting up with crashes and server disconnections and all the frustrating things that you can get when it's an alpha, as we're striving to make the best game, or well, I think the best universe simulation you possibly can make now. That's kind of where we're going. From myself and the team at CIG, we're incredibly lucky to be in this position, because I think no one else in gaming has the luxury that we do to really sort of dream for the stars and build something of the ambition that Star Citizen is. It's been a longer journey than I imagined at the beginning, but the game we're building is far more complicated, far bigger, far more possibilities than I conceived I would ever get to do. But it's because of your guys' support, and everyone at CIG feels the same in terms of they get to work on a dream game. They get to do all these things. People don't say, oh, you can't do that. We've got to make it for this quarter. It's got to come out. And the investors need their profits this year. It's like, no, we want the best game possible. That's all we at CIG care about, and that's all you guys care about. And so to be in that position is because of you guys. And I really, myself and everyone at CIG appreciates that. So thank you all very much. And I'm really looking forward to doing this in person for you guys next year, as opposed to digitally. And hopefully, all things, fingers crossed, we'll get on the other side of this pandemic, and we'll be able to do that. So for me and everyone at CIG, thank you so much for watching.